Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for our third Critical Conversations series. And I hope you all join me in welcoming Dr. Dana Edelson, who's giving the talk this evening, or in the demonstration as well. So Dr. Edelson is a hospitalist and the Executive Medical Director for Rescue Care and Resiliency at the University of Chicago. And she is a nationally recognized expert of in-hospital cardiac arrest and rapid response systems, with a focus on harnessing big data analytics and innovative technology to identify subtle changes in clinical stability and integrate them into clinical workflows to prevent failure to rescue. Her work has been published in high-profile journals such as JAMA, Circulation, and the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine, and has been cited over 10,000 times. She's the immediate past chair of the American Heart Association Get With The Guidelines Resuscitation Adult Research Task Force, and lead author of the interim guidance for basic and advanced life support in adults, children, and neonates with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. Dr. Edelson is also the president and co-founder of Agile MD, which is a clinical decision support startup, and was named by Becker's Hospital Review as one of the women in medtech to know. So she'll be giving us a talk this evening about sort of big data analytics and artificial intelligence. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Dr. Edelson.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm hearing an echo. Is it gone now? Anyone else hear it?
Okay on my end.
Okay, good. All right, so let me share my screen. And let's see. Here we go. Oh, sorry. All right, here's my doing. Okay. All right, so I was told to, let me see if I can put it in a slideshow. Can you guys see this? All right, so I was just gonna do a few slides and try and keep it casual for you guys, but I really feel free at any point to interrupt me, ask questions. I really hope you will. I'm a fairly informal person. So I was gonna talk just a little bit on the high level on about AI and predictive analytics and my journey around this and where I am today. But I think a lot about this work, we talk about healthcare as being, it's sort of it's both an art and a science. And because we have actual objective data, right? We vital signs, lab data, those are all objective data that come into us, but the art comes in how we interpret that. So we have to take that data, we have to turn it into useful understanding, make differentials, diagnoses, and figure out if someone's actually sick or not, right? That's so I'm a hospitalist. I've actually only really, I tend to really, well, I'll say I became a hospitalist. I was torn between being an ER doc and a hospitalist. The one thing I was sure I didn't want to be was an ambulatory doc, because the truth is I was really only interested in the patients when they were really sick, but not once they were intubated and like stable in the ICU, they were way less interesting to me. I've always been really interested in patients in those transition points when everyone's trying to figure out, are they safe enough? Is this a floor patient or an ICU patient? Is this, or is this someone who can go home or needs to come to the hospital? Those transition points are always fascinating to me. And the decision point that we're always trying to make at that point is this patient stable? And we do it with objective data, but we have to interpret it. And I think this is also not that different from baseball. And I know you guys are probably less focused on baseball over there than we are down here. But in our, baseball's huge. We take it very seriously. And Mark Grace was always my favorite baseball player. He's like old school Cubby. I'm from Chicago. Baseball is really similar in a lot of this stuff. In a lot of this way, there's objective data that people take into account, right? The stats in baseball look a lot like our stats in healthcare do. There's runs, hits, really abbreviations, just like we have them in healthcare, lots of them, right? But then we take experts have to figure out, how do we interpret that? Is this a patient? Is this a player who's going to be useful to our team? So scouts, for example, there's a whole industry around scouting where they're watching these people, they're interpreting these stats, and they're deciding, is this someone we would recruit or not? Well, If anybody has not seen the movie Moneyball, you need to see it, if only for Brad Pitt, but the stats are really good too. This story tells this movie tells the story of the Oakland A's back when it completely changed the way we do, actually now I will say that all of professional sports now use statistics and AI, but this was really the change, and this story of how the Oakland A's went from being a losing team with no budget at all and took their no budget and figured out how to prioritize and how to build a team, and they use statistics to do that. And the field around this is called sabermetrics. And there are lots of different statistics that people use in sabermetrics, but if you think about it, one of probably the most well-known of these would be the wins above replacement. And the idea of the wins above replacement, and this is going to be relevant because I'm going to get to like how I think about this now in terms of medicine, but the way wins above replacement, every player gets a WAR score, and that score essentially is if you take a team, right, that average player, an average salary player in any position, and you were to replace that player with this other player that you're talking about, how many additional wins for the season would the team be expected to get? And so you basically take all those individual statistics and you convert them into a WAR score for each player that takes into account all of these interactions of how this player would play on this team. And so the way that looks is a bench player has a WAR score of 0 to 1. They're just average. That's your bench player. A role player 1 to 2 wars are. But if you think about like a MVP, an MVP is worth about 6 additional games for the whole entire season. And so for an MVP, you'd be willing to pay big bucks, whereas for a role player, you probably wouldn't pay that much because you're just not going to get that many wins out of it. And this was a transformational way to look at baseball and now professional sports in general. And healthcare, like everything else, always just lags behind. And so we are way far behind what the rest of the world is doing. This has now been a while. We're talking 20 years now in this space. And partly why we've been so slow at healthcare, and I know you guys know it better than anyone, is because because we've been in paper charts for so long. And so we didn't even have data that was usable. But in the last decade or so, we've really started to move more towards having real data that we can use in healthcare. The move from paper charts to electronic health records has produced just tons and tons of data, and that data allows us to do things that didn't exist before. And with that, we now have new statistical tools that didn't exist before. And it's not just healthcare; the entire world has now been digitized. So things that were so the field of statistics has had to catch up to the data that were available to us, things that we can do now that just we couldn't do before. So AI has been evolving over this whole time. So you think about the concept of AI really dates back to the 1950s. We start to talk about machine learning, where computers can actually do this kind of stuff, can actually be programmed to figure it out by themselves without us having to actually specifically program them to do that. And now in the last decade, we can do things like deep learning, which allows us to do things like self-driving automobiles, for example, requires a whole different level. We just didn't have the stats to be able to do that, but now we can. Facial recognition software, all this sort of deep learning things that we can do now that we couldn't do before. So if you think about the middle one, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about machine learning, because while we do some deep learning stuff, actually the machine learning space is actually one of the ones that's where we do where probably most of this stuff is happening in healthcare now in terms of the concrete data that we're talking about. But you think, like, if everyone remembers when IBM Watson won Jeopardy. No, don't ask me what IBM. They just haven't even seen, like, Watson. IBM spent so much money in Watson. I'm not really sure what they haven't really figured out how to do. How to really capitalize on that, but they certainly did stun the world when the computer won in Jeopardy. That was machine learning programmed. So we spent some time. We'll say, if anyone's seen Netflix, for example, it's another example of machine learning algorithms. So Netflix has spent an incredible amount of money trying to figure out how to get you to keep watching. So based on what you've liked so far and what you're stuck on, they're running machine learning algorithms in the background to better predict what you will keep watching as your next show. That is all AI. One of the cool things they did, we stole this idea from them, was they open sourced a challenge. So they did they put out a data set of people's watching history and let a bunch of different statisticians compete to find a better algorithm. And they put up $1 million to the winner of that challenge. And the group that won that took the data and did the best job of predicting, had the highest AUC, actually did it with a machine learning algorithm called a random forest model, which is a tree-based model. And I can go into more of this stuff, but I was told to keep this happy hour light. So I'm gonna spare you the nitty-gritty of the AI. But basically, it's a tree-based model. It turns out to be really, really good at predicting what people are going to do. And there's a few of these types of models. We do a bunch of work with random forest. We turn the gradient boosted machine model is one that we use a lot, and I'm going to show you an example of that soon. But we've done a bunch of that space, and they work really well. Let me show you. So one of the downsides of these models is that you can't really see the model itself. So unlike logistic regression, for example, where we've now spent a bunch of time, I think probably most of healthcare analytics has used logistic regression for the last 30, 40 years. What's nice about logistic regression is you can show the model basically, and anyone can reproduce it, and you can do it in Excel, and it's really nice and clean, and we all know exactly what's happening. And as doctors and control freaks, we like to know exactly what's happening. You cannot do that in one of these machine learning models, these AI models. They're really black box to you. You can't see them. But there are things that we can do to enhance visualization, allow people to see them. So here's an example of this is a partial plot showing how the risk of deterioration in the hospital changes with age. I didn't make this up. I didn't ask the data to tell me. I'm just showing you what comes up in the model. And so you can see, for example, where the risk starts to pick up. And this is the point where when I saw this data, I panicked a little bit. Because whoever told you that 40 is the new 20 was lying. It's absolutely not true. You can see it mathematically and statistically. That risk starts to really go up when people are over 40. If it makes anybody feel any better, it just keeps going up. So it's worse at 50, it's worse at 60, but then it starts to level off. And really, after 70, there really doesn't matter that much. It really is like flattens up there. So yeah, there's some solace in there, but it freaked me out, particularly because I think I was 40 when I did this slide. That said, so this is just age with risk. And this also shows you why, if you were to so logistic regressions generally force a linear model on it, and so you'd be forcing it into a linear relationship, which isn't actually accurate if you see that. It's even more obvious when you look at respiratory rate, for example. So here's what that looks like. Here's the risk of having a deterioration event across respiratory rate. And so you can see here, for example, that if you're breathing at 16, 18, or 20, or let me correct that. If in the chart someone records that you're breathing at 16, 18, or 20, your risk is the lowest, because that means that no one's worried enough about you to actually count your respiratory rate. That doesn't actually mean you're breathing at that. But that if it's below that or above that, particularly if your respiratory rate is over 25, you should be concerned. Now, these are just two-dimensional relationships, but actually what's really cool about the work that we do now in AI and these machine learning models is they can take into account all the interactions. So that's just respiratory rate by itself, and the other one is just age by itself. But what happens if you interact the two? So this is a 3D model showing just those two variables, and you can imagine just infinite combinations of these things. But just to give you a sense of what this looks like, and again, this is real data. I didn't make this up. I'm spitting out the actual data to you. You can see, for example, that if you're looking on this axis, as your age goes up, the risk goes up. Just like I showed you before. Now, this is a little bit complicated. So think about, let me see if I can show you how to explain this. But here's basically here's how you look at this interaction. If you're breathing at over 40 times a minute, it doesn't matter how old you are. Basically, you're screwed. That's pretty bad, and you should be really, really concerned about any patient who's breathing in their 40s. I don't care whether they're 20 or whether they're 80, it's bad. On the other hand, if you're breathing at 10 per minute, for example, it's actually only bad if you're old. Again, you can't see this relationship outside. Like this is real data producing this kind of stuff. It makes total sense when I explain it that way, but here's a way where you can see it. So while the model itself is black box, there are ways to visualize it so you can have some sense that, yeah, that makes sense. So I'll say other things that have been interesting to me in this role, and I know you guys are in that space right now where you're still sort of transitioning out of your paper chart into your electronic health record. I know I got stuck in that phase. It was about 2 years at the University of Chicago where we had both paper charts and electronic health records. That was, I thought, the most dangerous place to be at the time. I thought paper charts by themselves were safer than the hybrid, and all electronic was safer. What's interesting to me about how we've done this in healthcare is we took a paper chart and then we built an electronic health record that basically was the paper chart, and we tried to make an electronic tool mirror our paper chart. And it's actually similar to what we did with banking, for example. Like we had really advanced banking that worked on paper and we understood how to do it. And so when we did mobile banking, we actually, our paper money, our system on paper money has always been really good, or it was. And so when we had to try and force that into a mobile payment, we haven't really made that transition. So we're all today living in this hybrid world of, how many people have cash in their wallet and Apple Pay or some other Venmo or some other electronic setup right now? So this is, so that transition, we did not do nearly as well as they did in Africa. So in Africa, where they didn't have this same issue of a really good advanced paper money system, they took mobile phones and actually got to reinvent. The whole idea was, okay, well, let's just do this in phones. So they built a system that actually makes sense, that works for the platform that they were using. That is not what we did. And so our stuff just still doesn't really work well. But people now can do all sorts of amazing things on these phones that are like flip phones, just because it was designed, they got to start fresh and just design for you to use that tool. And I wish, honestly, that we hadn't had paper charts before. We could have just started over. That's what I've been. And I would say that my general view has been to ignore everything that we did before and think about what I want. Let me just pretend like I'm in sub-Saharan Africa, and let me just build the system that I would want, independent of any constraints of how I thought about my paper chart before, and just start fresh. So that's what I did. I will say, I've been working as a researcher at the University of Chicago for years and years, and I did, and so all of this work that I did in eCart, this all stemmed from my NIH-funded research over there, and I spun the company out. We actually, all the IP is all owned by the University of Chicago and is licensed to my startup, which is now Agile MD. And here's the basic concept of it is we're pulling all this data in real time. We can calculate the predicted probability the patient's going to deteriorate. We can then, from that predicted probability, sort all the patients from highest risk to lowest risk. We can trigger them to, and then we can trigger activities all off of that. And the key from my standpoint is put it all in one place, make it super easy, but also make it explainable so people understand what's going on. So if I think I meant, let me say, I might break here for a second and pull up a demo if folks want to see it. But while I do that, I can stop and take some questions if folks have any.
Yeah, I think I would start with one question, and I feel like you're going in this direction. Mm-hmm. But you talk about sort of that hybrid electronic paper chart model being sort of a dangerous in between.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about the transition between, being able to identify these relationships and then convince people those are actionable signals prospectively instead of just retrospectively identifying those connections type of thing. And do you have trouble saying that they accept your AI or they accept the flag that comes up on the chart, or was there a lot of alarm, ignorance, and shutdown at first? Like, is there an in-between phase with that part as well?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. You absolutely have to. It depends. There's different types of users, right? There are the early adopters who love technology and will give you the benefit of the doubt, and then there are the slow adopters, the folks who don't believe it, who you have to prove it to a million times over. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Yeah, sorry. So we're just gonna. Okay. So, all right. Yeah, it takes people. It takes people some time to do it, but I'm a disbeliever and I'm a skeptic, so I always build stuff like that. I would never trust just a score, right? Which is, I think, a lot of what these EHRs now just want you to do. They're just their Epic, for example, has their deterioration index. They're not really showing you what's going on. They just expect you to trust their score. There's no score I would ever trust. My partner laughs at me all the time because before the pandemic, when I rode in Ubers, for example, or anytime I use, if I use any of the direction, the map tools, I never follow them exactly how I watch them. And so my business partner he's an engineer by background. He's an incredible guy. And he's like, you call up Waze, I have Waze, I have Google Maps, I have multiple things going at the same time. And I routinely don't follow them. And he's like, what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense. You know that if you follow, that the AI is better than you in general, that in general, if you always follow the AI, you will get there faster than if you just made if you don't follow it. And that is true, that on average, on par, if you always follow the AI exactly, you will overall spend less time driving. But that doesn't mean that at any given moment in time, the AI is right in that moment. And so at that particular turn, I probably can shave with all, you know, with my different stuff in that moment, I may actually be able to shave it. And that is the kind of skeptic I am around AI. I spend my life building AI models. And my view is that, and I would tell anybody, it is a suggestion. You should never blindly follow an AI ever, no matter what. I will say it a million times over. Never, never, never. It is a suggestion. It is one more piece of information. You should take it into account in the same way you look at the other individual pieces of data. It's just a better piece of data, and it's really good, but you should look at it, you should understand it. And I would never, never, never provide an AI to someone without giving them the requisite data to be able to understand what's going on, because you shouldn't trust me. And so think of, that's one of the things. In fact, what I'm going to show you right now is our brand new tool that we've done, where this whole idea is, in fact, about to get a grant on this. I think it's about to get funded. It told us it will. This space on how do we figure out how to better explain to you what's going on. That black box feature of these, I love these machine learning models, but the better they get, the more black box they get to you. And so I needed to figure out, how do I show it to you so you can trust it? And so that's what I'm going to show you right now. So let me share my screen again. Only let me put it in privacy mode so you can't see it. Okay. We do this. Which was here, to tell you, I think, just to sum up as we're like getting near the end, that I think the future of healthcare is probably not that different from self-driving cars. Watch really closely what's happening with self-driving cars. I think today, right now, we're in the risk stratification phase. We are about to get to the diagnosis phase. That's not dissimilar from that partial automation phase that we saw your cruise control, for example, in your car. We've had that for a really long time in our cars. We're about to get to these treatment recommendations. That's still a few years away, I think, where we can trust that when the AI tells us to give Zosyn, that's probably a good thing to do. It's gonna be a ways in healthcare. I don't know. I keep underestimating the amount of time it's going to get, but I have to think that within 5 years we're doing that. But I think from there, it's really not that far from, why not just send that signal directly to the pump? At some point, I ought to feel confident enough that my AI is good enough, just like the cars can actually drive themselves, that why not just know that patient's septic, give them the 12 cc's per kg and give them the Zosyn right now and have it automatically done. And why do I need to have a person in the middle who's going to just mess it up? But our AIs aren't good enough yet for that. They're really good, but they're not there yet. So
maybe I can interject, Dr. Edelson, because Dr. Bosman had a question and was patiently waiting for a little while back there. Maybe it was to interject into your demo, but Dr. Bosman, do you have something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. Dana, you kind of touched on this. This is just totally fascinating. So I have like 100 questions, but I'll keep it to one. In your pathway, you had a question of, are you concerned about this patient? And in our critical care outreach teams, we have that calling criteria when the nurses, like, they can call based on vital sign abnormalities, or they can call based on their sense of, I am worried about this patient. Do you have anything to build that in? Like, does that get an extra factor, the nurse is concerned, or like somebody physically is kind of has that sense of something bad's going to happen to this patient, I can just feel it?
So not yet, sort of. So let me answer. The answer is kind of yes, but not in the way you're thinking about it. So in that pathway, ultimately at the end, they're saying managing instability or stable expected. So they're putting in their gut. I actually, before I ever started doing this work, I built an intuition score called the patient acuity rating and published on it a few times before. I mean, this was years ago when I was a fellow. And so we had a 7-point Likert scale score of how likely do you think this patient is to deteriorate. But at this point now, we've compared that score. When we compared it to the Muse, it was actually comparable to the Muse in predicting deterioration. But if you added it to the Muse, it was better than the Muse by itself. And adding the Muse to it was, they were comparably good alone, but together they were even better. So I think your instinct is right that it will make the score better. And so we're working on that right now on how to do that exactly. And in fact, I have a summer student who's a medical student who's doing that project right now. But it's not entirely true that we don't have any intuition built in. That respiratory rate, that's 16, 18, or 20, that is a nursing intuition score. When the nurses are worried about the patient, there's an odd number, and somebody counts respiratory rate. I always tell people, if you see a prime number for respiratory rate, you should be really, really, really concerned, because the nurse counted respiratory rate for 60 seconds. So if you see 16, 18, or 20, they're telling you they're not worried. So what's interesting to me is, and one of the things about data is, as we get better at collecting respiratory rate, for example, when we have real sensors that are actually getting respiratory rate, we're going to lose that intuition score. So at that point, we better have another way to get the intuition score in there, because we're going to lose some really important data. Respiratory rate, even though it's actually physiologically, it's garbage in terms of the way it's documented, but it's really important because it is the intuition score.
And just part two of this question, sorry, real quick. Once this is only for patients on the ward, right? So once they're in the ICU, or they've had their deterioration needing mechanical ventilation or vasopressors, does your AI model stop, or does it build in like that they're on 6 vasopressors and their blood pressure?
No, they're censored at the point that they're on pressors or mechanical ventilation. At that point, I don't think you need an AI anymore.
Yeah, I was just wondering about within the ICU, knowing, like we tell all our patients, like families, that they're critical ill, they might die, you better come in and see them. We don't know what the next 24 hours is going to bring, but kind of just building into that aspect of it, I think would be really interesting. Not for the same reason, they already have deteriorated, but that whole risk of dying and optimizing our interventions timeliness, I think would be cool.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably a different model. But it's definitely interesting. It's to me, I've been more interesting. I'm more interested in trying to deploy the nursing resources. That's so I'm I've specifically left them out at that point, because I'm like, you're maximally deployed. If you're on 6 pressors and intubated, you're 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. You're not getting any more resources at that point. But I can see the interest in it. And there are other models and other folks who work in that space.
Maybe I can get Dr. Hedera to comment next. He raised his hand. I'm not sure if we still have something or if we've answered it.
I'll wait until later.
Okay, then Murat, I think also through his Maserati or whatever he's driving these days.
Mm-hmm.
F-150, my friend, F-150. Thanks for that. It's an excellent talk. It's really fascinating. Almost hybrid, moving towards it. It does have a cruise control though, so yeah. So I'm partially into AI territory here. So a very, very interesting talk. Thank you for that. My question, I guess, revolves around the idea that AI tells you to give Tazocin, and the physician thinks otherwise. Who wins, and who is responsible when this, if it ever goes to court or something? That's sort of, and sort of related to this, we here in London use point of care ultrasound quite a bit for assessing patients in shock or who are hypertensive. And so AI says, you have an AI algorithm, and AI detects that the patient's deteriorating, and it's because of blood pressure and the heart rate is up. So they are in shock state. Presumably the lactate is up as well. And it decides to give a fluid bolus, whatever it is, 12, 15 cc's per kg for that patient. But a physician is at the bedside with a focus and takes a look and says, well, actually this patient is in, RV failure and would actually deteriorate as a result of a fluid bolus probably. How do you negotiate that? Is there a way to build that in at some point? Thanks.
So you could build all sorts of things into the model for sure. So I'm a little careful about putting things in that are not consistently collected across institutions. So I always worry about the garbage in, garbage out model. So I don't have, for example, diagnoses. I never put in the model because I don't trust them, and that people do it consistently. Interventions are actually hard to extract, interestingly. Not impossible, but hard, and they need to be it increases the burden a lot to the model and makes it really, really heavy and difficult. So, and we've not found that it makes the model that much better. You have to really justify adding these heavy variables because it slows it can slow down the implementation. It costs. It increases the cost considerably on the IT side at the individual institutions, and depending on what you're running, it could potentially, depending on the type of EHR you're running, it could even slow stuff down. So you have to be able to justify putting stuff in the model. Do I think that stuff is relevant? It is, definitely. I don't know. Did I answer the question? I feel like there was something else you were asking me in there, and I'm not sure I fully got it.
Well, I guess, when it comes to it, and, I'm at the bedside, and I think that the patient should not get fluid. And the AI says, no,
yes,
give fluid.
I know.
And,
right.
And the patient dies regardless of the action, who's wrong?
Right. So again, I come back to you should never follow the AI automatically. Between your judgment and the AI, you got to take your judgment over the AI. You will, but in terms of, I can only speak to the legal system in the U.S., but you'll be held to the standard of care of what was the standard of care, not what did the AI say to do. So if the standard of care, if you didn't follow the standard of care and then the patient died, that's what you're going to be held to, not what the AI told you to do. At some point,
have you seen any case?
At some point, AI will be the standard of care, but it's not today. So at the point where the AI is the standard of care, then you will probably be held. But it's not anywhere right now.
So you haven't seen any cases where AI was appeared in court or anything like that?
I haven't. I don't track this stuff cleanly, but no, it's not the standard of care. And in every hospital that we go into, and we're in a lot of hospitals at this point, there's always that fear initially of this is going to be problematic, and we're going to get held liable for something that they told us to do. And we always say a few things, and this is held up, which is, there's nothing in the AI that isn't in your EHR already. It's pulling all that stuff together. So if your patient was hypotensive and you didn't treat it, again, that AI currently right now that I showed you isn't making treatment recommendations. That an AI that actually makes treatment recommendations needs a whole different level of review. That goes through FDA in a very different way than a predictive analytic does. So nobody's going to let that go through and set you up in without really, really a different level of scrutiny. But that said, what our attorneys have always said is, I would always rather defend a case with more data than with less data. So what we're doing is pulling the stuff up to the surface, but there's nothing in there that wasn't there. If the hypotension, the tachycardia, the tachypnea, it was inside the EHR. All we did was bring it to the front and showed it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Dr. Edelson, I had a question, and I think this is maybe just communicating my ignorance of exactly how you build an artificial intelligence algorithm like this, but how does the AI sort of get feedback about how valid its predictions are? Because you mentioned it kind of grows and becomes more accurate over time.
I'm saying it could, that you could let it learn from itself. And in order to do that, you have to feed it back the outcomes of what's happening. But you can do that. You can set it so that it continues to get better over time. I don't do that intentionally. I don't do that. I think that's a mistake. So every year we retrain the algorithm in the same way that we trained it the first time.
And then I guess my other question is, have you found that there's regional variability in sort of the patterns or the signal that it's picking out of the noise? Like, are patients in Canada different from patients in Chicago, or do you just sort of apply the algorithm the same?
I don't have Canadian patients in the sample, but if you guys want to participate, I'd be happy to use your data in the next version. I'm not really worried that that your patients are going to be different than the ones in Chicago, but you know where I am worried, and I don't have any in the model. I realized this. I was hiking in Colorado, and I hiked a 14,000 foot peak and brought a pulse ox with, and at the top, my friends and I were all passing the pulse ox around and looked, and we were like, you know, my pulse ox was 78% at the top of this mountain, and I'm like, oh my god, and I'm tachycardic, and I think, like, I would admit me like this, but I'm fine. I just hiked up this mountain. I'm gonna hike back down, and it occurred to me that probably altitude could impact some of this stuff, but generally we have a good mix of different demographics and age, and so and when we've tested across hospitals, there's not a lot of hospital variability, but the next version is going to have some high altitude folks in it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have the sort of a double. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Hedera. Pardon me.
So maybe I'll ask my question. Is my mic working okay? Hear me? So in the pathway, does your pathway point in time says you should give up now?
The pathway.
Go
ahead.
No, I'm saying, does the pathway say, you know, it is better that this patient passes away at this point?
Yeah, it depends. That pathway is totally customizable, and each health system does it differently. But one of our health systems, the rapid response pathway, has a checkbox for, are they meeting end of life criteria, and they run through a bunch of end of life criteria, and if they're meeting any of those criteria, they recommend an ethics consult. But I will say that the majority of our
fantastic.
Yeah.
I have a double-barreled question just to get a few more pieces of information, because I really appreciate the insight you've given this talk. As we sort of transition into the digital space, do you have suggestions as we're sort of becoming fully automated? If you were at, you were obviously there at the genesis or at the crossover of your institution, and do you have any lessons that we can incorporate? And the second is, with respect to telemetry or remote monitoring, this system you've designed seems to suggest that there's benefit to everyone being on remote monitoring, whereas at least in the institutions I practice, and I did my training out in the East Coast, where telemetry just was an automatic page that went into the garbage. We had 3 or 4 telemetries, but should everybody be on telemetry and oximetry? And how would you give us lessons as we transition in the next few months?
So a couple of things. One, try not to be stuck in that hybrid space for too long of the dual electronic and paper. Minimize that space at all costs. And again, when you make that transition paper, there are some things that people do that are really dumb, like allowing multi-select inputs that don't make any sense. For example, mental status is a great example. Every EHR I have to go in, there are things that we have to go clean up. So mental status, oxygen device, there's a whole bunch of fields where we allow people to enter data that makes no sense. So where it's a multi-select drop-down menu from hell, where you can say that someone is alert and oriented ×4 and comatose in the same drop-down. Like, no, you can't. No. But it allows it because, again, the people who built it were just like, whatever. They're not really thinking about what options you can and can't have. So be sensitive about any of the fields that you really care about that you're going to pull should make sense. And if they're supposed to be mutually exclusive in real life, they should be mutually exclusive in the EHR. In terms of telemetry, no, I absolutely don't think everybody should be on telemetry. I think telemetry has so many false alarms that it's the right tool. Telemetry was designed for patients that you thought were going to have a cardiac arrhythmia. So a patient that you're worried about having a cardiac arrhythmia should be on telemetry. The patient with a GI bleed or septic patient, you're not worried about them going into VF. That's not why you want to put them on tele. You want to put them on tele because you're worried no one's paying attention to them. What you really want to know is, are they tachycardic? And so what they need is tele light, not tele. So heart rate and respiratory rate monitoring would be my recommendation for those patients. But the low risk patients, I wouldn't put more signal on them, because the more signal you have, you're just increasing the likelihood that you're going to have false alarms. And false alarms are really dangerous because they mean that that people will ignore true signals.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll move towards wrapping things up, just because I think Dr. Edelson has another meeting to get to. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us and for this presentation that was fascinating and very, as I said, relevant as we sort of move towards our full integration of our EHR hospital-wide here. So thank you so much for a very informative and enlightening talk. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.